Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sciarretta. Come on in and hang out. This episode is brought to you by McGriff Insurance Services and Senior Vice President Mike Lutowski. For over a century, McGriff has focused on building long-term relationships to deliver innovative insurance solutions. The McGriff name dates back to 1886 and the founding of McGriff, Sables, and Williams. Today, McGriff is part of Truist Insurance Holdings, Inc., one of the top 10 largest insurance brokers in the world. McGriff provides highly consultative risk management and insurance solutions for businesses of all sizes, as well as for personal insurance needs. Coverages available include commercial property and casualty, small business, employee benefits, management liability, personal lines, and much more. Mike Lutowski's expertise is wide-ranging and includes transitioning employers from fully insured to partially self-funded medical, dental, and vision programs, HRA wrap programs, reference-based pricing, healthcare pricing transparency, pharmacy consulting, wellness programs, marketing, implementation, and ongoing management of fully insured benefit plans, and much more. Mike can be reached on his cell phone at 619-925-1731. All proceeds from this sponsorship support the Eric C. Mitchell Scholarship Fund at Albert Einstein Academies. The scholarship benefits graduates who exemplify the outstanding human qualities that define Mr. Mitchell's legacy. In this episode, I sat down with Craig Harris. Craig is currently editor and associate publisher of the Coronado News. You can find him online at thecoronadonews.com. You can follow Craig on Twitter at Craig Harris News. Craig has more than 30 years of experience in journalism. Previous to joining the Coronado News, he worked for USA Today and was one of the lead writers on an Arizona Republic story. That newspaper is affiliated with USA Today. The story was nominated for 2 Pulitzer Prizes, which are the highest honor within journalism. In his current venture at the Coronado News, Craig is spearheading an organization that is a 24-hour news website and direct mail free newspaper to all residents and businesses of Coronado, California. They cover city government, schools, businesses, entertainment, and the Navy. In our conversation, Craig and I touched on the evolution within the profession of journalism, talked about how young people can get involved in journalism, talked about charter schools, oversight of charter schools, financial improprieties and accountability within charter schools, and much more. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it. Welcome, Craig. It's great to have you on the Superintendent's Hangout.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
I was wondering if you could start off by sharing your origin story and a little bit about what your journey's been like over the course of your life, your career, and what brings you to the present moment, what you're doing now.
Okay, well, I'll try to be as concise as I can. I have a pretty unique background. I grew up in Oregon City, Oregon. I was adopted. My mom was Japanese American, was interned during World War II. Mm-hmm. I'm Caucasian, and my brother, who was adopted, is Chinese. So we had a very unique growing up system. My dad left when I was young, and my mom raised me and my brother, and she was disabled. And we essentially grew up on welfare and food stamps in Oregon City, which is right outside of Portland. My mom never graduated from high school because she was interned during that time. So she stressed on me and my brother, you will get A's and you will go to college, no questions asked. So I went to the University of Oregon, studied journalism, and then I started a journalism career. This will be my 32nd year. I started a paper in Olympia. Then I thought I wanted to be a youth pastor, so I tried that for a while, and then I realized I like being around kids and ministry, but that wasn't really for me. Got back into newspapers, worked at the Oregonian in Portland, worked at the Statesman Journal in Salem, worked at the Louisville Courier-Journal, went to Arizona, worked at the Arizona Republic, went to Seattle, worked at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, back at the Arizona Republic, Then to USA Today, where I came here in San Diego. And the reason we came to San Diego is my much better half got a job as an associate dean at Point Loma Nazarene. So that's what brought us here. And last winter, I was asked to start a newspaper in Coronado. It's just called the Coronado News. It's a weekly paper, and our website's thecoronadonews.com, and that's kind of where I am right now. It's been kind of a wild, interesting ride.
So it sounds like you've always been interested in narrative and storytelling. Can you talk a little bit about what your specific areas of focus have been in journalism, and in particular in relation to charter schools? Because I think, if I remember previous conversations correctly, you focused somewhat on charter schools and financial compliance and, if I can use the F word, fraud in Arizona charter schools.
Well, I got to be careful on fraud.
Okay.
It wasn't quite
not that F
fraud.
word.
It wasn't fraud. It was, you would call it maybe questionable financial dealing.
Not totally passing the scratch and sniff test.
Right. No one was ever charged with
Got
crime.
it.
So I want to be
Okay.
very careful
Okay,
about that.
good. I
So when I
appreciate
was
that.
at the Arizona Republic, I spent a whole year writing about charter schools. Arizona loves to brag that it is the epicenter of charter schools. A large number of kids, almost 20% of public school kids go to charter schools in Arizona. And there's a reason for that. During the last 25 to 30 years, the Republican-controlled legislature and mostly Republican governors have not funded public school systems in Arizona very well. They are near the bottom. Teachers are horribly paid. So out of that grew charter schools. And charter schools, if I can take a step back, charter schools started under the Clinton administration, and the reason they were started was to give kids and parents and educators choice to do things that are innovative, like you're doing here at Albert Einstein. Kids want to come to Albert Einstein, and I know you have a waiting list because two of my neighbors brought their kids here and got into your school because you're doing remarkable, fantastic things. And that's what charter schools were supposed to do in Arizona when they began 25 years ago. They were intended to be a place where you could have diversity. You could have a school that just focused on AP tests. You could have a school that focused on athletics. You could have a school that focused on equestrian. That was the reason. And that's good. Competition is good. But the problem happened in Arizona is they're very loosely regulated. During the time that I covered them several years ago, there was 5 or 6 people that regulated the entire state of charter schools, 400, 500 charter schools. And they only had to turn in their financial audit documents once a year. And so there was very little oversight. And the boards in Arizona, you could handpick your board members. You could have your friends, your cousins, your sister, your wife. So there's very limited oversight. So a lot of people said, not a lot, there's a few so-called entrepreneurial people who wanted to use public money. They became millionaires. And we wrote about that. We wrote about they were getting no-bid deals to build schools. They were paying themselves over $1 million. They were commingling money with their private schools and buying a $6 million penthouse in New York City. So I wrote about that for a whole year and made a lot of people really mad and upset. And then I came to USA Today and I wrote another series of stories about charter schools that did not lose any money during the pandemic. They didn't mean they were fully funded, because we know charter schools and public schools can never really be fully funded. But charter schools didn't lose money during the pandemic in the main. And I wrote about a lot of these schools, including some in Arizona, which paid a dividend of over $1 million to the top shareholder of the school during the pandemic, while it took, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the federal government in a free loan that didn't have to be paid back. And how we got introduced is a person said, you should check out Einstein. They had the opportunity to get PPP loans, and they could have helped themselves, but they didn't. So that's where I wrote about you folks, and then I wrote about other schools around the country that had huge endowments, had huge amounts of savings. And what we found at USA Today was that there was $1 billion that was handed out in PPP loans during the pandemic that basically was free money. And the schools, by and large, didn't need it. The schools, by and large, over 95, maybe 97% didn't lose a dime during the pandemic, and they just took the extra money. So I've written primarily about the financial irregularities, because fraud is a crime.
It is.
And no one has ever been convicted. Well, some folks have been convicted of a crime in PPP scams, but the ones that I wrote about were never arrested. It just raised a lot of ethical questions. And the problem was there was no oversight, and there was no way to correct that, especially when you had a Republican president with President Trump, and you had a Republican governor in Arizona with Doug Ducey, who was very laissez-faire and didn't really mind that this money was being distributed.
I have already taken my lumps for speaking publicly about PPP, but I would do it again. And I appreciate your approach, because I know how much time and effort goes into investigative pieces, especially when you start to get close to the third rail, which is questioning organizations around their use of funds, however that looks. I know you took extra care because we had multiple conversations, and I know how much research happens behind the scenes in that. I think it also speaks to this continuum of charter school authorization and oversight between California, where we're authorized by local school districts primarily, or county offices of education, and in limited cases, the state. But the guidelines and restrictions are significant and have become more so over the years. And then a situation like what you're describing in Arizona. And it's really a rhetorical question as to what the midpoint there is, right? It would be nearly impossible. I'm not going to say impossible, but nearly impossible to pull off some of the things you mentioned in a California context. That sounds like happening in Arizona, right? Where you just have 5 people looking at 500 schools once a year. So it's an interesting reflection. I spoke with a charter school expert, Eric Premack, in a previous episode. He wrote part of the charter law for California, and he has a vision of trying to find an alternative to charter school oversight that might be a nonprofit commission somewhere that's a little closer to the ground level to keep an eye on what folks are doing, but also give enough freedom. So it's an interesting thing. I wanted to ask you about your experience with the profession of journalism over the past 30 plus years, because like most professions, I know it's evolved. Could you speak to that and the things that you see that are hopeful and then also challenges?
Yeah, that is a really good question. When I started back in 1989 in Olympia, Washington, we had actually pressmen, unionized pressmen, who were in the back of the paper, who laid out the paper. And nice guys. We were an afternoon paper at that point. They were nice guys, but older gentlemen. I don't mean to be mean, but they were union guys who didn't want to do more than they had to. It's probably not very nice. So when it got close to deadline, we would literally move them aside and say, come on, you guys need to move over. Go do what you need to do. And we would do the process of cutting and pasting type, not type, but cutting and pasting, I don't know what the right word is, but basically laying out the paper right there.
On like a light?
Like a cut and paste,
almost like scrapbooking.
Like a scrap, yeah, exactly, exactly. It was like scrapbooking,
right? So
that's where we came from in '89, and I got a pager back then, which was a big deal.
The whole hit me on my hip thing.
Hit me on the hip like I was a drug dealer, and I would get paged if something was important, and so that was a big deal back then to have a pager. Then we finally got to where we started getting little, you couldn't even recognize them today, little peanut-looking phones for cell phones that you would call stuff and you could call stories in, you could dictate. Now today, we have iPhones where we can take a photo, we can take a video. They're very good. situation. Matter of fact, I took photos and videos of you in your school for USA Today.
Yeah.
And you can send stories and you tweet, and you have Facebook and you have social media. And it used to be that, back when I started, you wrote the story and it came out in the morning, or it came out in the afternoon at the afternoon paper. That was it. Today there's a situation where you cover a huge breaking story. You're writing it one time, then you're tweeting, then you're sending out a video. Then, when I worked with the Arizona Republic, I'd also write a story for USA Today. We also had a partnership with the TV station in Phoenix. So, then there would be a time that I'd put on a suit and go do a TV interview, and then maybe go back and rewrite the story. So it has constantly evolved. The problem is that newspapers got very greedy in the late 1980s, 1990s, got very, very greedy, didn't reinvest, didn't really start looking towards the future around 2000 when the dot-coms came in, because that's when Craigslist came around and took away classified advertising, which shrunk revenues. Then we got to 2006, and then the housing crash started, took away a lot of advertising because we were in a huge recession. People weren't buying cars. People weren't buying homes. So then we got to 2008 and kept going through there. And newspapers just continued to contract over and over and over. And so, more than 2,000 newspaper publications have gone out of business in the last few years. And the company that I used to work for, Gannett, they merged with a company called Gatehouse about 5-6 years ago. And at that time when the merger happened, there were 20,000 employees. 6 years later, there's now 10,000.
Wow.
They've cut their staff in half. So it's been a huge evolution. Unfortunately, I'm very blessed that I'm still able to do this at the ripe old age of 55. And I think there's a great future and a great hope. I love journalism. There's a lot of stories I'm very proud of that I've done. And I've had other colleagues that have done great stories that have made differences in the community. But the system keeps evolving. But I think there's nothing like having good trained journalists who understand ethics and reporting and things like that.
It strikes me as an interesting tension between, obviously, when you run a newspaper, you have to keep the lights on and pay people. But if you have a venture capitalist, or I should say a hedge fund that buys up 10 newspapers and they're in there just trying to cost cut, they're also running it like a business. But the question is, how much of the ethics of journalism are they still preserving? And then you look at some of these emergent tools like the AI that everybody's talking about, Chat GPT, which, full disclosure, I use when I need summaries of information really quickly. How do you see the future of some of those new technologies? Because there's so much stuff online that appears to be an article, and then you see it's written by someone who really has no official journalistic credentials. They write for whatever this online publication is. How do we know, as consumers of journalism, how can we distinguish? Like, how do we know that CoronadoNews.com is legitimate or not? And how does that compare to San Diego Union Tribune or USA Today?
Well, for us at the CoronadoNews.com, we hope to someday be like those publications. I mean, as a startup, we have to prove ourselves. And one thing, and I will get back to the AI thing, but one thing that we did out of the gate is a good friend of mine, Dennis Wagner, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner and lives here in San Diego, and we've been friends for 20 plus years. He helped me, along with two of our young staffers, do a 5-part series about the sewage crisis and raw sewage coming up from Mexico. And so right out of the gate, we wanted to do a 5-part investigative series to show that we were serious and doing good journalism. And, we cover the city and the schools very aggressively. We also have fun features and do silly things like Pet of the Week that's fun. But getting back to the AI, I'm a little bit leery on that. Especially for news gathering. I think you want to have real people talking to real people to get news. And if you go back to what happened with George Floyd, which changed the whole culture and a lot of reporting because he was beaten in Minneapolis, If we would have just gone by the press release was a black man that was arrested. But because people were there and had iPhones and could visualize what happened, we knew a black man wasn't just arrested by a handful of police officers. We saw he was killed. And so we can't just trust government to take their word for it, or it becomes almost George Orwellian that Big Brother is in control of everything. So, a lot of tools are good to make things faster, to get news out faster. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to have humans. Now, humans, of course, make mistakes. I had an intern who was a very lovely young lady, and she turned in 2 stories, and they were just riddled with errors, and I had to let her go. So, but hopefully in real news organizations and publications, you have someone who is an editor, who's a backstop, who reads it, who thinks about it, and is a good gatekeeper of the truth, and wants to be fair. And that is what I hope we have.
How do you strike that important balance between, full disclosure, your newspaper is on a small city on a peninsula that is called an island, but it's not really an island, but it's its own ecosystem. And how do you write, at times, hard-hitting journalism, if we want to use that term, but still remain in enough of people's good graces that you can come back and talk to them later about something that's not hard-hitting?
That's a good question. And so I keep talking about this, but the 5-part series we did about sewage coming up, it affects tourism. And a couple people said, why in the world are you going to highlight or put a light on raw sewage, poop, for lack of a better term, right out on our beaches here in beautiful Coronado? I said, because it's a health crisis. And after our 3rd story ran, I got a call from a guy who said, buddy, I love your stories. I'm so glad you're finally looking at this mess. We're sick of swimming in this. I've lived in Imperial Beach, which is just south of Coronado, my whole life. I'm sick of this. How can I advertise? I said, are you serious? He goes, oh yeah, I want a full-page ad. So he's taken out a full-page ad this week and the week before, and he's been telling all of his construction friends, which are big advertisers, these guys report the truth, so keep advertising, supporting them. So, and it's funny, the Coronado, the Hotel Del, which is a very ritzy, upscale place, nice to stay, they've become one of our advertisers too. Now, granted, we wrote also a very, for lack of a better term, a nice story about their $400 million investment, but they could have said, well, if you stop writing those stories about sewage, which affect our customers, then we'll advertise some more. We're not going to do that, and so we've been able to pick up advertisers. We got unsolicited, a new advertiser this week who saw our publication and saw our online and wants to advertise with us because we reach a demographic that person wants to do. They rent high-end luxury vacation homes along the beach. And, our target audience in Coronado is a pretty affluent, high-end place. But we also have a very high focus on the Navy. And we have a section on that. We have 2 pages devoted to that every week. So we also are getting a lot of people saying, well, wow, they're writing a lot about Navy news, which is general, which is not negative, not positive. It's just, here's what's happening. And a lot of that is not getting picked up. So our metrics from Google Analytics, which is, there's no messing around with this.
That's right.
We're getting people from all over the world reading our stories because they like our Navy coverage, and so, I think if you do good stories and you get eyeballs on the stories, like our average reader spends 2 minutes on a story. That is off the charts in the journalism world.
That's high.
That's like 4 times the average.
Wow.
So people are reading our stories. Now, granted, we have to grow our audience. We just hit 12,000 viewers in a matter of 6-7 weeks, which isn't bad.
Right.
But if you do good journalism and eyeballs come onto your site, advertisers will go with you as long as you're fair. As long as you're fair and as long as you give everybody their equal chance to say that, we do investigative stories, but we tell people, this is what we're going to write about. Will you please comment? And at first they just said, who are you? But then we started publishing stuff and tweeting out, and they're like, oh, well, I guess I better talk to these guys because I want to make sure I get my side of the story in.
I recently read I think it was, I don't know if it was an editorial I think it was in the San Diego Union Tribune, talking about a politician in Coronado touting the Coronado approach to homelessness. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it is out there in the news. Does Coronado have a homeless issue?
We actually wrote a story about that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
did. Look at that.
Actually, because Mayor Richard Bailey went on Fox News.
That's what it was.
And he said, he was trying to say how they deal with the homeless problem, and then he went on Fox News, and they made him out to be the hero or the
champion.
The champion. There's no homelessness in Coronado. Well, we looked into it. Well, the reason there's no homelessness in Coronado is because the police department picks them up and drives them across the bridge and brings them to homeless shelters and dumps them here in San Diego. That's why there's no homelessness in Coronado. It's not because people don't want to be homeless in Coronado. It's because the police force is extremely active in picking them up and being very nice to them and bringing them over to shelters, which in one way puts them right at the front door of a place they can get help.
Right.
So that is an answer, so to speak, because they're not just loitering or lingering. But if you go over to Coronado, and I'm sure many of your parents know this, it's like Mayberry. It's, pristine up and down the street, and those shops don't want homeless people there. And so they're very active to make sure they don't essentially exist there. And also the other little secret, so to speak, is it's pretty darn hard to get to Coronado.
That's right.
You have to either pay to get over on a ferry, which most homeless people don't have, or they're not going to be able to truck all their stuff over on a ferry. You can't walk across the bridge or you'll get hit and you'll fall over and probably die. Or if you're trying to come from Imperial Beach, it's 6.5 to 7 miles on the Strand, which is all a highway and a freeway, which there isn't anywhere to stop along the way. I mean, you could go to Coronado Cays or the Cays, but that neighborhood is going to call the police essentially and get them to pick them up. So is there a homeless problem in Coronado? No, but there's a reason, and we looked at that. And as a matter of fact, I got a text the morning after Richard Bailey appeared on Fox from a person who's a friend of mine in Phoenix saying, hey, can they come solve our problem in Phoenix? And I'm like, well, if you round up all the homeless in Phoenix and take them out to Apache Junction, maybe that would solve your problem. But that's why there's no homeless problem. Now, you can argue with what the mayor is doing here in San Diego, who's come under fire from folks like Bill Walton. And, there's no question. There is a homeless crisis.
That's right.
In this city as well as other big cities. And, there needs to be, going off.
Portland, Oregon, another example.
Portland,
Oregon is
horrible. It's my birthplace.
Yeah.
And part of it is there have been policies that have allowed people to encamp and take over private property. They don't have a right to that. They really don't. And so you have to find a balance of treating the homeless problem, finding the way to take care of them, especially with children, and dealing with the drug issue of that a lot of the men and some of the women have with either methamphetamines or they're medically they have medical issues or they have mental issues. And it's going to have to become an issue of resources and spending money to have to take care of it, because otherwise you're going to have more encampments. It's not good. You're going to get hepatitis. You're going to get diseases, and it's especially not good for the children who are living on the streets.
I read about Bill Walton's experience. I think it really what brought it to a head was that I think he was knocked off his bike riding one morning, and that prompted him to write an article, an open letter to the Union Tribune and about the mayor, and but this is nothing new in San Diego. This is if you watch the numbers when they do the homeless counts every year, we're always, even downtown, I think we had 2,000 or something recently, and it always seems to be right around that number. Although it shifted during the pandemic, and then we had the hepatitis outbreak, and I'm not sure if you were in San Diego when that happened, but they kind of scrubbed streets and moved people around. But yeah, look, I don't know any city that solved it. LA certainly hasn't.
No.
LA just turned it into a district within a city, Skid Row.
Right, and that doesn't help anybody.
It doesn't.
Right, because then you have more access to hepatitis or other diseases or AIDS or other sexually transmitted diseases that are easily that go on during that time. So, it's not an easy snap the finger solution. And Richard Bailey went. It's funny because he did make national news. He actually made international news. It got picked up in England. It got picked up in Mexico. And we asked him about that, and he kind of walked it back a little bit, and he's actually a good guy. I mean, he actually has his sights, I think, for higher office, and he does care deeply about his community, but it's not like there's some magic formula. That's why there's no homeless people on Coronado. There's a lot of reasons for that.
Do your reporters live in Coronado, or it's a mix?
No, right now none of us do. We all live in San Diego. Part of it is that my paid reporters are 22, 22, and 23. So
unless they're living with their parents, they're not living in Coronado.
Right, exactly. So they can't afford to live in Coronado. And I just bought a home in San Diego 2 years ago, and I'm not going to move to Coronado. I would love to live in Coronado, but the median home price there is a little over $1 million, and I think the average home price is closer to $4 million. Right. So, the community's been very good to us. I would love to live there, but I don't. I think that would help on some situations if I lived there. It is a challenge as an outsider, but I think also as an outsider, we are more objective.
Right.
If I went back to my hometown in Oregon City and I still ran into some of my old chums that I played junior high school sports with, and I'm running the paper in my hometown, and I find out that 3 of my buddies that I played baseball with all got popped for DUI. Well, do I want to run that story?
Right.
Here, I don't have any allegiances to those folks, so I think it's better to be more objective doing that.
I was chuckling because I read a recent article about Manny Machado on the Padres, and he lives in Coronado, and when he and his wife were renting a house, I guess now they built one, but they were renting a house when they were moving into the neighborhood. An older gentleman came from next door, didn't know who Manny Machado was, and said, I hope you young kids are not going to have a lot of parties around here because this is a quiet neighborhood. So I guess he said, no, we're quiet people. And I don't think the neighbor knew that he was talking to MLB star and someone who's worth $400 million. But it was an interesting reflection on just the dynamics of Coronado.
Well, it is funny. There's about a half a dozen Padres who live over there, and we're hoping actually to do a one-on-one with Manny, like why'd you live in Coronado, like a fun feature story, right, and maybe try to get the other 6 or 7 Padres to do a series. We're hoping to do that. Part of the reason I've been told that he likes living there is because everybody else is pretty well off there, and it's not that big of a deal. Also, some folks have told me, their high school kids babysit for Manny or babysit for other players, and it's pretty quiet because those players pay their babysitters pretty well, and it's hush-hush. And if you go over there on a weekend, you're going to see multi-millionaires or billionaires walking around in sweatshirts and sweatpants, and you probably won't know
yep,
how much they make, and they fit right in. It's a beautiful city. It has a lot of wealth. There's no question about that. And it's a very interesting place that we've been able to cover.
What advice would you give to students K-12 who may be interested in pursuing a career in journalism? How might someone prepare themselves, and what steps can they take in the before they go to college to kind of position themselves for a career which is, if it continues its trajectory, will be different by the time they graduate than anything you've experienced maybe? Yeah,
I would say work at your student newspaper if you have one, or start one. Start a student newspaper, start a newsletter. Work for the yearbook. Learn to take photos. Learn to write concisely. Take as many writing classes or literature classes as you can, and be as broad-based as you can. Take as many math classes or history classes or language arts classes. When I was in high school, if you had enough credits, you could essentially by your senior year go to class for 2 periods and go home. And that's a big mistake. My biggest mistake when I was in high school, if you can believe this, in Oregon in the 1980s, they didn't require a foreign language. So I didn't take one, which is crazy. It was, it really hurt me. It was all electives. And now it is required in Oregon, but it wasn't required when I graduated. I was only required to have 3 years of math. So guess what? I just took 3 years of math.
And no language.
And when I went to the University of Oregon as a freshman, oh, Nelly, I was one of the top students in my class at Oregon City High School. I was in the top 10%. But boy, when I was at University of Oregon, it was a real eye-opener to me because I did not have very good grammar skills. I didn't have a foreign language, and I didn't know how to study that well. And so I quickly learned, but I would say take as many classes as you can. And learn to cover things. You know, if you don't know anything about volleyball, go cover it. Go learn about it. And and then do your homework. Google is a great term, great system, great thing to have, except for AI. It is, and learn about a lot of different things. Be involved in your community. Go out for activities. Go out for sports. If you get cut on a sports team, go find an activity to do. Don't just go home at 3:00. And unless you absolutely have to, do not get a job. Now, I understand there are a lot of kids, they have to get jobs. I had to get a job when I was in high school in order to pay for my clothing, to pay for sporting equipment. So I do understand that. If you don't have to work, don't. Get in a club. Get in a sport. If you're not good at sports, be a manager. Be around other kids, because the more involved you are, that is going to help you in a career in journalism. A lot of things in journalism aren't just writing. It's about who you know, the relationships you have. People call you. During my 32-year career, I've had stories where I've written stories that people had got infuriated with me, swore at me, cussed me out, got mad at me. 6 months later, they'll call me up and they'll give me a tip about somebody else because they knew I was fair.
Right.
But because I knew it was never personal. So be involved, learn good skills, be fair. And I guess those are a lot of things I would say. And then when I tell college kids, I tell them, take as much math and accounting and business classes as you can, because even though the world of journalism is constricting, the journalism world for business is still very vibrant and very lucrative. And there are a lot of niche magazines for banking, for accounting, for
like a trade
for trade stuff.
Yeah.
But there's also the Wall Street Journal they haven't contracted one bit at all. They're still growing. Bloomberg is growing. Bloomberg pays incredibly well. There's Bloomberg TV. So there are lots of areas in business that if you learn about how to cover a business or how to read financial documents, you are golden. You will be fine, and you will get a job somewhere in journalism.
That's interesting. That's really good advice. We're working on the programming for our future high school, and we'll definitely, in fact, we have a task force that's working on it, and the topic of a high school newspaper has come up already. That's definitely going to be part of what we do. Some of my fondest memories were I went to Bowdoin College in Maine, and I was a reporter and an editor for the Bowdoin Orient, which was the college newspaper. And when you were talking about cutting and pasting, we had to do that. I'm talking about 1989 to 93. And I remember we didn't have printing press, so we had to take our newspaper laid out on these pieces of paper with blue grid guidelines on them and drive them down to the Brunswick, Maine, the Brunswick Times, I think it was. And it had to be there by 6 a.m. on a Friday in order to get printed and handed out by Friday night. So every Thursday night was an all-nighter. But Mountain Dew and pizza and laying that sucker out, and the Mac was just coming out, so we could type and print it out, and interesting experience. But I think I've pulled those lessons forward into my life about deadlines and trying to get things right. And I also saw the power of journalism. There was a newspaper article, we didn't write it, the Brunswick Times wrote it, where this is again early 90s in Maine, but a college professor was caught in a compromising situation with someone of the same gender, and the newspaper wrote about it, and the professor took his own life.
Oh, wow.
And so I remember thinking, wow, this is not just something to mess around with. This is powerful and can change lives and trajectories too, for good or for not so good.
Right. Like, I mean, first of all, it sounds like you might need an advisor for your high school newspaper who lives in the neighborhood. There's
actually a reason. That's the ulterior motive for inviting you to this podcast. No, in all seriousness, we will.
I will be happy to look at that.
We'll definitely be in touch. Yeah.
But if you're a college sports fan, you know about the Fiesta Bowl. It's a huge bowl game in the backyard of Phoenix, and I got a tip in. I got a tip in December about they were involved in activities of pay to play, of making campaign contributions to politicians because they're trying to gain favor for the bowl game, and then they were reimbursing their employees, which is illegal. And long story short, over a course of 4 years of writing that story and doing it, the CEO of the Fiesta Bowl, who made $650,000, got fired and went to prison. And lost his job, lost his status, and he went and served time behind bars. And after he got out of prison, coincidentally, I was going to a Phoenix Suns game, and I was in line to get tickets, and there was John Junker, the guy I wrote about, who my reporting put him in prison. And he looked at me, and he reached out and shook my hand, and we started talking about Oregon football because he knew I was an Oregon football fan. I said, I thought, well, maybe he's lost his mind. He doesn't know who I am. I said, John, do you know who I am? I'm Craig Harris. He goes, yeah, I know who you are, Mr. Harris. He always called me Mr. Harris. And he said, what I did was wrong. And I have no one to blame but myself. And I said, okay. And he said, I wish your family well. I said, I wish yours well, too. And now he's working at St. Vincent de Paul, and he's making $60,000. He's making one-tenth of what he used to make.
But he puts his head on the pillow at night and closes his eyes peacefully.
Right, because he got convicted, but I think at the end he also reached a plea bargain, and he knew everything. He actually got a really good attorney. He should have the feds wanted him to go to prison for 3 to 4 years. He ended up going for 11 months. So, regardless, right. He went to prison. He went to Club Fed down in Tucson.
But he's a convicted felon.
He can never vote again, and he's done. He went from Sports Illustrated called one of the most powerful men in college football to a convicted felon, and I played a role in that. Yeah. Now I don't take great joy in putting someone to prison and ruining his life, but it was the truth, and what he did was wrong. So
yeah, I have just a couple more questions. Sure. I know you're a little pinched for time because today is, as you said, editing day.
Yes.
So I want to respect that, and I really appreciate you coming in here with your Oregon Ducks sweatshirt. I guess it's Ducks or Beavers, right?
Well, Ducks is the one to root for. Beavers are the other school. That's the junior varsity. Okay. That's the little brother.
I take no responsibility for any hate mail that's going to come in as a result of those comments. But it's interesting, in Oregon, cars have one or the other bumper sticker.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times it doesn't even it doesn't say anything on them, or it's just a logo.
Just the O.
The O.
Just the O.
Yeah. In Oregon.
Just a nice green O.
In Oregon, know your college sports. Yes. If you could wave a wand, a magic wand, how would you tailor make journalism 20 years from now?
Wow.
What would you do? What changes would you implement for the good of humanity?
I would, well, this is an interesting point. I would go and try to recruit kids from Point Loma, Nazarene. They have a very good journalism school. Or I would go try to recruit kids from maybe BYU, or I would try to recruit kids from faith-based schools who may have a different view of thinking or a different background than where I went from University of Oregon. Even though I lean to the right and am evangelical, most people that go to the University of Oregon are not. Most kids who go to state schools are not.
Right.
I think newspapers need to go and give students who may have gone to faith-based schools or maybe have gone to non-Ivy League schools the opportunity to write. We had a lot of interns that we brought in as interns and then eventually hired who had Ivy League degrees, and they couldn't write, and they didn't understand a lot of the places we asked them to cover. And I'm not blaming them. I mean, kids are kids. They just grow up where they grow up. They just have an opportunity, you know. But I think if newspapers want to succeed in the future, they have got to diversify. And I'm highly in favor of hiring people of color, hiring people who are from the LGBTQ community, because you need those voices.
Right.
But I think one of the voices that has been lost are reporters from faith-based schools or reporters who may be conservative. And if newspapers want to succeed, they need to hire folks like that so they can cover their communities. Now, the problem is a lot of the reason you don't get people who are typically more conservative is because journalism, like teachers, unfortunately doesn't pay very well.
Right.
And so most people who are conservative go into banking or accounting or auditing or anything else but that. And so you don't get the kind of diversity you need from the business side. But, you know, I've got 2 of my 3 full-timers from Point Loma and 4 or 5 of my interns from Point Loma, and they all show up on time. They turn their stories in on time. They're fair. Now, I need to work with them a little bit because they're young and sometimes they editorialize and they're a little too cheery. Right. But I need to cut those out.
A lot of exclamation points.
Well, they just editorialize in that they're being very positive. And I'm like, okay, let's just let the story sell itself. We don't need your comments. But traditionally, Point Loma and some of the other faith-based schools haven't had the opportunities at the Union Tribune or bigger papers. Right. And so they miss that diversity and that kind of thinking that is important. It's really important to have people who are people of color. I mean, I grew up, my mom was Japanese, my brother was Chinese, and the first openly gay editor at a major newspaper at the Arizona Republic, Randy Lovely, is one of my best friends, and he hired me. I strongly believe in a broad swath of diversity, but for newspapers to succeed in the future, that tent needs to widen a bit more.
It's interesting. I had written down here bias ? As you were speaking, and it strikes me that perhaps it's humanly impossible to not have bias, and what we're really looking for is balance.
Yes.
Of perspectives, right? Because what you just described is just reinforcing echo chambers in the sense that if folks from certain universities and certain political perspectives are going to hew in a certain direction towards certain professions, and other folks are going to go in another direction, we're trapped in our echo chambers. It's one reason I will only watch C-SPAN now. I can't stand CNN, and I can't stand Fox.
Right.
So I just don't want anybody giving me the commentating perspective at all. I just want to see, even if I have to watch a hearing and then they turn off the microphone and everyone's drinking water and walking around shaking hands. To me, at least, no one's telling me how to think.
Right.
But it's something I wrestle with as a school system leader, is that, you know, if we really talk about well-rounded students, we can't have echo chambers of thought among our staff and among our teachers, right? If it's just schools tend to, in California, lean left.
Right.
And so if you don't have someone pushing back on some of these ideas, then is that really balanced at all? Because it's a debate. We could go on for a long time about this, but I don't think that I think it's impossible to be entirely without bias.
Of course, yeah. I think naturally you have bias. Absolutely, there's no question, and that's a hard thing to get over, and you just have to recognize it, and you have to try to work through it. And I spoke at the Optimist Club in Coronado last week, and I had a question: how do you keep your reporters from being activists? And I said, have you read their stories? Read my paper. I check that, and I am very careful. We are not activists. Our editorial page takes positions, but we, if there is bias, I want you to tell me, and let me know. Now, if you're doing an investigative story and you're going to kind of punch someone in the face because they are accused of misusing money, well, they might say, well, you're biased. I was like, well, no. We're writing about what you did that was wrong, So I think you have to really be careful, and you have to just make sure you're right down the middle. And I think if you are right down the middle and you punch the right just as hard as you punch the left, you are going to get people who will read your paper, and you will get advertisers because they'll say, well, I didn't like this story, but man, this other story was really good, and they took a shot at so-and-so. So,
yeah, I think, an interesting reflection point for me, and then also for the Albert Einstein staff and community, right? We're international baccalaureate schools, we're IB schools. That tends to lean to the left. Are we really balanced at all times? Are we down the middle, or how does that look? And I know I'm going to wade into some shark-infested waters if I say anything more, so I'm going to leave it there.
Well, I think it's good to make sure you have, regardless of where you're at, to have people who don't think the same way you do, and that's really important to have those kind of discussions. My best friend, or one of my best friends, Dennis Wagner, who helped me on this project, and we've been friends for 23 years. We think alike on some things, and we're way apart on other things. But we're really good friends because at the core, our focus is to do ethically balanced journalism. And, you have to let other things just go. I mean, and sometimes you just have to, on some things with people, just agree to disagree because there's more things to agree about.
Right.
And to focus your friendship and your business relationships on.
This has been a real pleasure, and I had promised you 45 minutes, so I'm going to end with this. You have the chance to design a billboard for the 5 freeway as you're driving from San Diego over to Coronado. And so, you get 3 seconds to give this message to the driving world as they fly by. What would that billboard say about the career of journalism that would be inspirational for folks?
Well, what I would do is I'm going to steal this from a former employer of mine, and I would say it's in the news. And I steal that from, I used to work at the Seattle PI, and that was the tag up in the Seattle, it's in the PI. We try to say that it's in the news. To get people to look at our publication, to get people to look there, it would be short, sweet, they'd think about it. And you would go there to our site and decide for yourself what the future is. Also, you're looking to see what happens, whether it's sports, whether it's City Hall, whether it's schools, whether it's Pet of the Week, which, my goodness, is like one of the biggest, I've only been publishing 5 weeks. I have a laundry list into the summer for Pets of the Week.
Pets of the Week. Sometimes they take precedent over our kids.
Yeah, it's funny. And we also have students of the week, which has been great too. And so we have a student of the week or a teacher of the week every week, which we really like to do. So I guess with that, I would say it's in the news because there are lots of things you can find, whether it's a profile story about, like we have a really good story about a young lady who's a softball player or a track athlete. And we try to do things that are different. I am very intentional, and this is kind of a segue, but I am very intentional when I write stories about the Navy and I pull things off the Navy wire, that we show photos of people of color or women who are serving our country, because they do. And it's important for people in Coronado to see that. Coronado is very white, but I think also there are people in Coronado who have shared with me they don't like the reputation they've been given, especially after what happened with the Tortilla Gate situation 2 years ago. They believe that was an isolated event, and the community is not racist. And unfortunately, like the baseball team has played in largely Hispanic communities, and they get harassed when they go on the road, and so do the parents. They had absolutely nothing to do with that event.
Yeah, that was basketball. Correct?
That was a basketball
Right.
game. That was a basketball game where tortillas were thrown after a game when Coronado played a largely Hispanic school. So there are people in Coronado, they are salt of the earth. They're very lovely people, and they really want to they want to be respected in this community. They would like to get away from the reputation of snobbery. But are there snobs in Coronado? Of course.
There's snobs everywhere.
There's snobs everywhere. There's snobs who live in South Park, where I live,
Yeah.
A few more snobs in North Park because that's a little bit nicer. But, it
moves around.
It moves around, yeah. But, you could get that anywhere you want, anywhere that there is. So what I have done is I try not to focus on the 5% of the people who are just not very nice and mean and tell me I don't belong there, and focus on the other people who say, God, we really like your product. We really think you're doing a good job. And so I know I've kind of gone full circle on that last question, but that's what I hope we accomplish in Coronado. We hope we bring a newspaper that people are proud of, that we bring a real newspaper to the town that they can be proud of, that they can enjoy, that is a place that has open dialogue, that we have a strong First Amendment. And we hope we're successful. We hope to make a profit. Yeah. And so we need advertisers. And so I think the only way we do that is by presenting a good, viable product that is objective, except on an editorial page, which leans to the right, which is fine. But we need to be sure that we're objective, that we're covering events. We get a lot of kids in there, a lot of photos in there, and we hope people will buy us. And taking that to the next level, because the Union Tribune can't put some of the hokey stuff that we put in.
Right.
But I think the Union Tribune does a good job in the main. I think they are. They're fair. They're balanced. They try to cover as much as they can. I worked at a paper in Louisville where they were proud to be the most liberal paper in the South. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's a good thing. And actually that paper has declined in circulation. So I think the future in journalism is to go back all the way back to Walter Cronkite days, where you could just trust someone to present the news and know that whether it's good or bad, you can trust it.
Thank you for that. You mentioned CoronadoNews.com.
The Coronado News.
Coronado News.
You got to get like the Ohio State University.
Okay. Look at that. So I'll link that in the show notes. Where else can folks find you on social media? What's your handle?
We're on the Coronado News on Twitter.
Okay.
Good gosh, I should know. It's on We're on Instagram. We're also on Facebook. Okay. You can find us there.
Great.
If you want to be read one of the first editions, go up and down Orange Avenue on Thursday afternoon. You'll see copies throughout the stores.
Great.
We drop them off. We'll start working on hopefully a mailing list in the future if you want to get Coronado News. If you want to reach me, you can get me at Craig, Craig, at thecoronadonews.com. I'm happy to take op-eds, take tips, take advice, take criticism, and take lots of compliments. And so if you want to send some information my way.
Thank you so much, Craig. I want to get you out the door and get back to editing. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for focusing on this really important area of society, which is journalism.
Thank you very much. It's been great having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayao for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.